I have a general question. How often does the EC4 membership get reconfirmed? For instance, the people that the governor assigns to it, how often do they up for the Senate?
So the EC4 membership is comprised of agency heads. So that's what it is. And the ones listed in the statute are 9, and it says and others. And currently it stands at 12, with the others being included, like the infrastructure bank, that was included. I think WIP has been included. So there are a few others that have been added in, but it now stands at 12. And because it's executive branch agencies, they don't need to be appointed. The staff is an appointed body.
Right, and those are 3-year terms that roll, so a third of the group cycles out every year.
My thought being, if STAB isn't doing their job, then when it comes time to reappoint them in the Senate, that would be a time to go and say they haven't really been doing their job, for instance, and push for change or.
And I think that they've done work, and it's been important, but then there's this other piece of it, and my read of it is they were responsive to what the council requested of them, rather than examining the legal requirements and saying, what does this also do? So that it's, and they don't have staff, and my experience on boards and commissions is that they really do better if there's staff assigned to them that makes them, helps them run their agenda and does that sort of thing. This is the, your question really leads to what is a fix? Now, just hypothetically, probably a minimum staff size is something like 3 or 4 people in the operation. You need one for the General Advisory Board, one for the staff, somebody to oversee it, and sort of a support. That is something that can be done, if you want to, with relative dispatch in state government, because the Director of Administration can pull people from one agency and put them into another agency by signing the transfer and doing it. And so you can do it. When I headed OER, I had that kind of people. I needed legal counsel, zip, it was take from DM and given to me. So you can have that happen. So it's not a good long-term solution, but if you have priority work that needs to get done, you can do it. Others? Yes.
Yes, what does the legislation that established EC4 say about issuing findings and recommendations? How does that relate to the statutes that created it?
It's very, the one that created it's very explicit. It's contained in the annual report section, and I have it here. I can read it. So,
in case you didn't expect that.
Is the staff meeting regular?
No,
When they last
we
meeting?
have not met all fall. I think our last meeting was, do you know when the last meeting was?
there were some in 2017 that didn't have quorum present. The last one that I saw quorum was late in 2016. So, reporting, no later than May 1, 2015, and annually thereafter, the Council shall issue a report of its findings and recommendations and progress on achieving the purposes of the chapter.
So it's completely not complying, the current board is completely not complying with the statute they created.
On this particular item, its reports have come out in June, and August, and none yet for 2018.
And with no findings and recommendations.
And without findings and recommendations.
Right. Also, do its reports look at individual subsectors for emissions? Does it look at transportation versus electricity generation versus industry?
It's covered in the plan, but in the annual reports, no.
what it more does is describe what state agencies are doing. So if you want to find a marvelous, and it really is marvelous, it's fascinating to look at, what state agencies are up to, what they're working on, it contains that. And then it will contain a summary of the governor's lead by example initiative, things like that. It does that, I would say, superbly. And that's valuable to have one place that you can see that provides a comprehensive listing of what state government's been doing. That's not a bad thing, but it's not, you still need findings and recommendations. So it's good, but is it sufficient?
Yes, that's all.
I want to give Timmons a chance to answer your question, Steve, about is staff working? Because you're on that committee, so from your point of view...
So what STAB has been asked to do by the EC4 has been reporting on the science of climate change in broad terms, what it means for Rhode Island. So there's a report that we did a couple of years ago, and then it was updated. It was started as a series of PowerPoint slides on sea level rise, temperature change, water temperature change in the bay. And I can't remember what, there's 6 areas. And then that became the introduction to the Resilient Rhode report, which came out this last summer or whatever it was. So in terms of doing something, yes, it's done something, and that is summarizing some of the science on impacts. There's not been a review of what the larger scientific community says is necessary for us to avoid dangerous climate change, or what we'd have to do in our economy to avoid surpassing 1.5 or 2 degrees Celsius of global mean temperature change, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has said is the highest levels we want to go before it's going to get really bad. So, for example, in the Paris Agreement, agreed in 2015, right in November, by almost 200 countries, including the United States, said we should seek to stay well below 2 degrees and get as close to 1.5 degrees as possible. And Governor Raimondo put out an executive order 1706 supporting the general goals of the Paris Agreement. However, there's not been really an effort by the EC4 to actually have the state act in conformity with what the part of the Paris Agreement says is necessary. Even the U.S.'s pledge of reducing our emissions by 26 to 28% by 2025 has not been translated into Rhode Island action. So I would say we have not really responded to the spirit or the letter of this legislation, unfortunately.
Just another idea. When we talk about getting the report with recommendations out by May 1st, oftentimes May 1st is very late in the legislative session, and there's no way to get action going on in the last 2 months of session. So even May 1st would probably be not an optimal time. We'd want to aim for February or January even, optimally, to get these ideas ready and percolating and working through the various committees. If you really want to have an impact in the year that these recommendations are made.
What happens is, in the legislative session, is that the Revenue Estimating Conference is the second week in May, usually around May 10th or so. Mm-hmm. That's when they know the revenues, the balance of as of the end of the first calendar quarter of the year. And that's the best projection of revenues is at that point in time. Then they get into the hustle to get out mode, and this legislation really starts to flow, because a lot of legislation, anything significant, is effectively held pending budget unless it's emergency in nature. So a May 1 date allows you to influence not what gets introduced, but how things are disposed? What's the fate of them? Most of your sub-A's occur in that May-June period.
By which you mean revisions of introduced legislation?
Introduced. So there is a logic for a May 1 date. Is it as good as earlier and for the formation of legislation? Absolutely not. But you'd say there's a logic for it. If it comes out at the end of June or in August, it has almost no impact. And I think that that's we need to really use having the report be impactful if we want to move beyond business as usual.
Can you reflect on, is there a legal recourse for civil society if state agencies are not meeting the ordinance?
In theory, yes, but as a practical matter, it's so tortuous that it's like trying to do mountain climbing barefoot. I mean, you can do it, but nobody chooses to.
So no yellow vests in downtown Providence? Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that's why, for example, CLF is wants in its version of the Global Warming Solutions Act to have a right of action for compel state agencies written into it. And so that's the kind of safeguard CLF says is that within a clear path. So we have an entity that's out there that's done good work, but not everything that could be done. And we need more work to be done going forward. And what makes this assessment timely is that it arrives before the session when it can help influence what gets drafted, and that is in fact intentional.
You both probably have the governor's ear from time to time. What are she or her people telling you why they're resisting change? Either having substantive legislation that passes or having EC4 having more teeth. What are you hearing?
I have not spoken to the governor at all. I certainly speak with Janet White and Carol Grant frequently. And I would say that what we have is a system of institutional inertia. And that and just getting through the day regarding our responsibilities is substantial. That OER stretches hard to get the existing energy agendas implemented and deserves enormous credit for that. But the big issues like the transportation sector remain an enormous question mark. So that the Rhode Island has a series of statutes, as you all know, that there's great marks in the electoral section, right? That's American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, Union of Concerned Scientists. Well, say Rhode Island does, compared with other states, a very good job. So we try to do more of that very good job, and that's labor intensive, and it's worth doing. But the two big things that are out there, which are transportation and solar and thermal energy in buildings are almost business as usual. Not quite, but almost. And so that, and that's why what we really are suggesting is that we have to upgrade the efforts. And that's for us on the distributor side to say, let's upgrade. Political life in Rhode is often public opinion following rather than public opinion leading. And that's why it's very important for people who are concerned about these issues to understand them and to do things, because that is what then creates momentum for making the big changes that are called for.
Just to follow up to say, you know, we've had these two major scientific assessments come out this fall from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Special Report on 1.5 degrees, saying that we are way off track, that we've got to totally get ourselves off fossil fuel in the next 15 or 20 years. And then there's the National Climate Assessment that said basically, as somebody summed it up, that the status quo, that is, you know, chiseling on the edges, is a suicide machine. That is, the status quo is a suicide machine. If we continue to make these incremental changes, that we are doing ourselves as a society, as a species. So I think, you know, we've seen a new movement, the Sunrise movement of young people. Young people are just unwilling to accept this, the status quo as an answer. And so we have to do better. And that's, I think, that's our role here, is to say, we want to help the state move away from the status quo, to think bigger. I think, you know, I haven't spoken directly with the governor in a long time, but with her, you know, upper staff, I hear things like, you know, we need to be incremental, we need to live within the politics of the possible. And I think that, again, it's a suicide machine for us to take that approach. We need bold solutions, and not only that, the bold solutions are shown to be beneficial to the state. It can create vast numbers of jobs. These are, you know, basic jobs in weatherizing homes with caulking guns and blowing insulation. This is, you know, going up and down the streets of Olneyville with, you know, with an insulation truck. It's, you know, converting to electric vehicles, installing chargers, and you know, incentivizing people to make the switch a little bit sooner. You know, retrofitting our infrastructure. It's dealing with our sea level rise and so on. There's a lot of things that are going to that could create a much more equitable and prosperous Rhode Island. And it's just unfortunate. There is this politics of the General Assembly and in the Senate that are quite difficult. But I think some real leadership could break through on this.
Just a quick point on OER. They're actually at the EFSB every time I'm there to advocate for the Barber power plant. So, I mean, they may be doing a good job, but they're certainly not on that issue on the new side of that, and they're pushing for it, not against it, nor are they neutral. So, just want to put that out there. OER's probably not doing a good job it should be doing.
Yeah, I think it's got a mixed portfolio. I mean, it's doing some of these very good energy efficiency programs and some renewables things. They're making happen. They're trying to help make happen the governor's goal of 1,000 megawatts of renewables by 2020, which was quite ambitious, very ambitious. But then there's this other side of facilitating natural gas infrastructure, which I guess they see as, you know, necessary for affordable and reliable energy in the state, but which there's quite a lot of evidence refuting the necessity of it. So yeah, it's a mixed bag.
Tim, you've done some work recently on lobbyists and other people that have been resisting change on this front at the State House. So who nationally and locally is preventing some of this, you know, legislation going forward?
Right. So There are a number of actors. We did an analysis of 49 pieces of legislation introduced from 2012 to 2017, and who showed up to testify for them and introduced written testimony that we could actually go back and evaluate. So we went back and read all those with a team of researchers in my climate and development lab at Brown, and found groups like the American Petroleum Institute, right, a national organization funded by oil companies, the big ones, who have a $241 million a year budget. And they are, they have a lobbyist in Boston who comes down and introduces testimony and speaks against this. There's, the Oil Heat Institute, there's the convenience store owners, which means gas station owners. There are Tech RI, which is the large companies consuming electricity. So many of these are the fossil fuel industry itself, which of course has succeeded in defeating any meaningful climate change action by the United States of America, and influenced the United States government in undermining global efforts for the last 30 years. And they in fact knew very well the science of climate change. They had the best scientists in the world, showing that their product was going to create an unlivable planet in a matter of decades, and yet there was this turn in which they squelched that science and turned to a very active effort of undermining the policy, but then also undermining public confidence in science generally, using the same toolbox and as the tobacco industry did, trying to make people and policy makers especially doubt the link between the science saying that smoking caused cancer. So then it's actually some of the same people are the lobbyists and the strategists for the fossil fuel industry protecting themselves. So the research shows that one of the things that is in these plans of the fossil fuel industry, they were secret plans. Some of them have been leaked to the press. Say things like make it look like there's a number of voices. So they will create front groups, and we just have released a report about 12 front groups that have gone over the last 12 years. I'm sorry, the last 30 years. They do PR campaigns. They do things like pay workers or actors to show up and protest against, or in favor of fossil fuel facilities like power plants and pipelines. And they, show up at legislators' offices or at rallies during, recesses in Congress to push the legislators around. And they're at the State House, and they're meeting with our Office of Energy Resources regularly, and the other agencies, I'm sure, and they're making campaign contributions.
Mm-hmm.
Those are quite important, and that's why I think the pledge, again, being pushed by young people to get fossil fuel money out of our politics is really important. All that is beyond this assessment, of course. I mean, the assessment really focuses on the EC4.
Yeah, so
I think it is related.
The assessment is one of those necessary and pieces of work that is crucial to being able to make progress prospectively. If you don't have this, you are sort of trying to dive into a lake without having a diving board. This is a springboard to jump in, and that's why we did it, and why we wanted to have it understood more broadly, so it's not just an insider document, but showing that a diversity of interest, which is what are included in the Civic Alliance, take this issue of how well the apparatus established under the Resilient Rhode Island Act of 2014 is performing, so that we can make the necessary upgrades and adjustments so that it can be positioned to participate in the yet more heavy work to come. further questions on this? Anybody else want to say something?
Well, the positive aspect of discrediting the science that you mentioned, the tobacco industry didn't win that.
That's right.
And it's
They took
it's
state
really
attorney
important-
generals,
It's really
yeah.
important to.
But they're still out there, yeah.
Well, it's
They
still important.
abstained
They
from
did not,
this.
they did not win that one, so that fossil fuel industry, is also, I think, in the same situation. I mean, a considerable amount of, even the last meeting, Paul, I mean, the science is now, even Republican senators, as the Trump administration starts to crack up a little bit, I think they're willing to, at least according to the White House, they're willing to listen to a little more other issues from the science side. So there's a little more brightness in that angle, at least.
So maybe a final, final question. So what's next?
What's next?
What's
Well,
next?
I think that we will certainly be working on how can we refine existing ways of structuring what's done in Rhode Island so that it can make necessary progress. That is a multi-front effort, and there's certainly we're in communication with others that are working on it. So it's not just us, but others such as CLF and Oil Department and all sorts of people. Community groups are working on this, and we look forward to participating and supporting those efforts.